the way that I get asked about what's the best way to get into the property market, and to avoid being ambiguous, I think the answer truly is it depends. And I think it depends on the person's situation. And let's take two examples. Let's say I'm a young person that lives at home with mum and dad, or I'm a young person that's paying rent. They're two different reasons of why I want to buy a property or get into the property market. One is, if I'm living with my parents, I want a first mover advantage. I want to get into the property market and then be able to live on my own. If I'm paying rent, then that's wasted money. So I want to go and buy a property to live in. Whereas the objective for the person that's living with mum and dad is to enter into the property market for the purpose of likely in the future renting that property out as an investment. Whereas the person renting has already moved out of home, and their objective is to buy a property to live in, which would be then used as an owner-occupied property. So they're very different objectives, and so they rank in priority. In my opinion, the best way to enter the property market is by looking at genuinely what you can afford, and not looking at the government grants and therefore buying a property based on what the government grant you could get or something like that. So taking it back to the point about how to enter the property market, if you live at home, you can then enter the property market by saving money and paying for a deposit. Whereas by paying for that deposit and living at home, you actually need to demonstrate what's known as a 5% genuine savings rule. Okay? If you live at home, you really have to demonstrate that through savings. Whereas if you rent, you can use the rental payments as a proxy for savings, which means you can satisfy that 5% genuine savings rule. So if you're an owner-occupier living at home, wanting to buy your first property, it might be more difficult to buy a property and you may not be eligible sometimes. Whereas if you're renting, then you would be eligible because you're already renting and therefore can prove capacity. So they're the kind of different priorities that I would look at of entering the market. There's no straightforward black and white answer. I'd rather buy an investment property or I'd rather buy an owner-occupied property. It's what you can genuinely afford and what you are eligible for. They're the differences.
So just a follow-up for that,
Yep.
just to recap and try and make it clear for people
Yep.
as well. So the gist of what I got from that is that there are advantages to being a renter.
Yep.
To actually getting into property.
Yep. Well, there are advantages. So if I try and bring it down to the two differences, if you are renting, you are going to buy a property that's going to be to live in. Whereas if you are living at home with mum and dad, I find that the objective is to buy a property, but in the medium term, you either move back home and rent that property out, or you buy something else because you've outgrown that property. So the disadvantages and the advantages are this. If you live at home, you may not be eligible to buy a property unless you genuinely have more than 5 to 10% saved in your bank account.
Yep.
Whereas as a renter, you might not necessarily need to have the 5% genuine savings rule. You might have mum and dad give you the funds, and you use what you paid as rent as a proxy for you being able to demonstrate that you can afford the home loan.